Good afternoon. I'm Michael Donovan. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the Municipal Art Society. Our last panel today brings together inspiration from around the world for ways to increase New York City's livability. From Dallas, Chicago, London, Toronto, we'll get an international perspective on reinvigorating and enriching a global city. Before we get to this, we turn to Eugenie Birch. Jeannie Birch is Lawrence C. Nussdorf Professor of Urban Research and Chair of the Graduate Group of City and Regional Planning at the University of Pennsylvania School of Design. She is also Director of Penn Institute for Urban Research and co-editor of the university's City in the 21st Century series. She's a prolific author. Her recent books include Women's Health and World Cities and Global Urbanization. Jenny has held many leadership positions and is currently president of the International Planning and History Society. She has been Commissioner, New York City Planning Commission, and a member of the jury to select the designers of the World Trade Center site. I am proud to work with her on the board of the Municipal Art Society. Please join me in welcoming Jenny Birch.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Slides are not working? Okay, we'll just wait till they come. I'm very happy that I'm following Heather Grady because much of what I'm going to talk about will provide context for some of the things that she was talking about. And in particular, what I want to talk about today is livability in the light of global urbanization. Just what is happening around the world and how do we fit in New York City is the question that I have for us at the 2011 MAS Summit for New York City, and also is the question that I'll have for our panelists who will be speaking later. So there are 7 themes that I'd like to talk about right now. First of all, as you know, more people will live in cities than ever before, so that by 2050, 2/3, almost 70% of the world's population will be urbanites. And they will be predominantly Asian and predominantly African. And overall, they will be much older. They will primarily live in small cities, 500,000 to 1 million, and there will be populations that will be medium-sized as well, though a substantial portion will still live in megacities. We're a megacity, but we have to remember that the majority are going to be living in other kinds of cities. They will be workers in urban economies concentrating on secondary activities, and these things will be shaped very much by globalization and new technologies. And I think what we're seeing downtown with Occupy Wall Street is some indication of some of the feelings that are occurring here with regard to this. They will also share social tensions as ethnic and racial strife and income disparities will be present, and they will experience environmental crises, much as you heard from Heather Grady. And they will call for physical improvements and amenities in their cities, and we'll have a panel that's going to talk a lot about that today. And finally, they will demand to have a say in defining the best quality of life that can be planned for and achieved. So let's look at these things a little more. The startling thing, I think, is this little graphic on the bottom left. It took us to get to our first billion urban population, about 10,000 years. It took us to get to the second billion population, 25 years. The third billion, 18 years. The fourth billion, 15 years. So the trajectory of growth is absolutely incredible in terms of what the world is experiencing. And this little graphic just shows you, basically, if you look at Asia, the red piece of the pie, traces Asia in 1950, in 2000, and 2050 in terms of the number of inhabitants that will be living in those regions. And as you can see, Europe is a shrinking piece of that pie. North America is not so badly off. And if you look at the final graphic there in the lower corner, you will see that the life expectancy, health is improving, but there are still major disparities among the peoples of the world, particularly with regard to health and the kinds of services and the kinds of activities that we do within this urban arena will have a vast influence on that. In terms of where they're going to be living and the sizes of the cities, if you look at these two pyramids, you'll see those top 2% at the bottom. is the cities that will be megacities. Again, New York is one of those, and 20% of the world's population will probably be living in megacities. But where they're really going to be living, as I said earlier, is basically they're going to be in those medium-sized cities, 1 to 5 million. And those are the cities that are going to demand a good deal of attention in terms of providing amenities and providing the services that will be needed. And the managerial capacity in those cities will be lacking as well, something that we need to be thinking about. Nonetheless, as I said, a substantial portion will be living in megacities. I'm wondering if you can identify some of these megacities. These are basically the megacities list of the world today. I'm sure you can pick out one, but here are the rest. And if you look at that list, you will see basically New York is number 6. You will see most of them are in Asia. Most of them are not in the Western world. The economies, here we are, the 5 largest economies, EU, US, China, Japan, Brazil. Look at the drop-off in that lower left corner. Look at this other graph that shows you how the per capita GDP has grown dramatically in the past 100 years, but it's grown dramatically in different regions of the world, as you heard from Heather earlier. And the components of our GDP is changing, of course, with the service industry remaining are going to be very important. But what do we mean when we say this? Let's take a look at India. We have huge disparities in terms of what this means. We have the laborers who are providing the low-cost labor for the consumer goods, of which we're so dependent. We also have the knowledge workers who are providing the services which many of our populations used to provide. Social tensions. All you have to do is open up the newspaper and you will see where these social tensions are happening. They're not happening in the countryside. They're happening in cities. The density, the disparities, the issues of servicing and so forth are creating some of these problems. And in terms of servicing, the problems are enormous in terms of dealing with waste, providing water, creating livable communities in the world. Environmental crises, if you've read the newspaper recently, you know that a good part of Bangkok is underwater. Dealing with climate change, as we heard earlier, but also just dealing with providing the normal kinds of services that are needed is going to be a major challenge and continues to be a challenge. We will call for physical improvements and amenities in our cities. I'm showing you some examples from the Western world. The Barcelona Olympics, for example, was an example of something that really transformed that city. In Shanghai, we will see a big section of that city also being transformed after the Expo. A brownfield having been converted to create the exposition space and now will be reconverted and repurposed for business and residential. And today, we're going to hear from this group of people, we'll introduce them later, about the kinds of amenities and changes that are occurring there in their cities. The physical improvements that they'll be calling for are going to be everything ranging from more open space to provision of the services that are so required, and they will need to be part of the process in terms of making sure that amenable planning does occur. So this is the global context with which we are going to meet and talk today on our panel. The 7 points I hope you'll keep in mind as you hear from our speakers who hopefully are going to come up right now to the podium. I think I've spoken more quickly than I'm supposed to here. The chairs aren't here. We'll just wait for the chairs to come. And while they're doing that, I will introduce them slowly. So we have Peter Bishop, who is Director of Allies Morrison Urban Practitioners. We have Lynn Osmond, who is President and CEO of the Chicago Architectural Foundation. Rahul K. Bhardraj, President and CEO of the Toronto Community Foundation. Brent Brown, Founder, Building Community Workshop, and Aaron Red, the Urbanophile. Now, as you notice, most of these folks are from the Western world, and I think they're going to address issues in the Western world, and we chose them so purposely. But I wanted to give you this global arrangement in which we are living so that you can help us and yourself think about and measure the kinds of policies and programs and activities that the Western cities are engaging in to remain competitive in the global economy, to remain livable places such as we all want, and to remain communities of lasting value. So now, will my speakers please come forward? Now, would you like the clicker?
Thank you.
Peter, tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
It's interesting.
Right. 6 years ago, I was asked by the Mayor of London to set up an architectural workshop called Design for London, the Mayor's Architectural Workshop, with a very, very open brief to think about and shape London and make it a better place. London, with its dark landscapes, its eccentricities, and its extraordinary diversity of population, but also matching that, a diversity and a complexity of decision making. This is a graphic describing how many organizations get involved in designing one piece of open space in London. And actually, a lot of my role, I think, is about brokerage and navigation rather than planning. But also addressing some of the really big urban issues like equality and health. This is the tube map of London from Westminster, the centre of London, to Stratford, where the Olympics is. 10 stops. If you travel along it, the difference in male life expectancy between Westminster and Stratford is 10 years. And the consequences of that degree of social inequality is manifested itself occasionally, as it was in the summer in London, with the kind of the riots and those kind of social pressures. So in setting up Design for London, the big question we had to ask ourselves was, how could a small team influence a city as anarchic, chaotic as London? And we set our objectives as, first of all, thinking conceptually, constructing narratives and not plans, using those narratives to build alliances, holding the pen, drawing, controlling the procurement of architects. Good architects produce good buildings and good neighborhoods. Poor architects never will. And then finally, be prepared to be incremental. And I'm going to just take two examples, one the macro and one of the small local initiative where we try to change the face of London. The first is using the Olympics. And the really big problem with the Olympics is, how do you take an enclosed sporting campus and after the games break it open to form a piece of city and realize the regeneration, which is part of London's bid. The planning is in place. That's the master plan for the Olympics next year. And we've now produced the Legacy Master Plan, which is a 25-year master plan to transform the Olympics into a piece of London. But that alone won't solve one of the big questions about regeneration, which is looking at how it impacts on the wider area. And the question we asked ourselves was that if you are a single parent, a first-generation immigrant living 2 kilometers away from the Olympics, why would that make any difference? So we did a piece of work called the Fringe Master Plans, where we looked to see where in each of the 6 areas we could do 60, 70, 80 small things to stitch back together that piece of city incrementally and make a real difference to people's lives, both physically, socially, and economically. And those programs are now underway. Then secondly, asking the even bigger question about how the Olympics could act as a catalyst for the regeneration of a wide area of East London, characterized by its vacant and disused and derelict old industrial dock infrastructure. Private investment's been very, very slow to move in there. So one of the ideas was, rather than plan it, rather than master plan it, come up with effectively a branding and a marketing exercise. And this is what we term the Green Enterprise District. It's not a plan, it has no statutory weight, but we launched it out into the world. We used it at the Shanghai Expo. We talked to a lot of people about it, and it's generated a lot of interest for investment in this part of London. The idea you can actually regenerate around the emerging green technology and green industry. Siemens have come into this area and taken a once derelict site to put their UK headquarters in and their Environmental Innovation and Research Centre. We're using that in the narrative then to build very, very simple plans and get the landowners in place and behind it. And then finally doing the odd wild thing, and this is the London cable car. This came up in a conversation 15 months ago between myself and the Mayor, is now on site. It'll cross the Thames, it'll link the Royals back into the Greenwich Peninsula. It'll be a great public transport addition to London, but better than that, it's the best marketing billboard we could ever have for the Royal Docks with the Olympics coming up next year. And then thinking about how you do strategies locally, how you use what you have in terms of existing the capability and the resources locally, how you build on those, how you really map and understand the intricacies of community relations and community infrastructure. And a lot of our work involves putting design teams down into those neighborhoods, doing design charrettes, open design exercises over 3-4 weeks to involve local communities, and then follow it up with very, very simple incremental plans, which you can build slowly. You can demonstrate action within weeks of the discussion. And we use very, very simple graphics to try and demonstrate that what happens in these charrettes translates into new places that people can understand. And then backing that up with a series of temporary initiatives. This is a piece of work we did in Dalston in central London. A once derelict site. This is a wheat field with a mill. It grinds bread which is sold to the local community. Not important in terms of food production, but very important in terms of energizing a local community about reclaiming lost space as part of their own area. And then investing in public spaces. This is Brixton, the new public space we've just put in. Brixton was where the riots happened in 1982. They didn't happen in the summer in Brixton as part of a concerted effort to actually build the infrastructure around those communities. And then finally, we're becoming very interested how you take the idea of incremental implementation and think about temporary uses and pop-ups and how you can utilize those to get the traction to change neighborhoods. Temporary uses not just as things which are good in themselves, but temporary uses that can evolve into quite complex businesses which might have a life over a week, a year, 5 years, 20 years, or may finish, and try and actually see the city in 4 dimensions and look at how we can choreograph that. And this is an initiative we've just finished in the Royal Docks. We advertised a large piece of vacant land, publicly owned, available for 2 years for £1. It's been taken up by the people who organise the big music festival in Glastonbury every year as what we call the London Pleasure Garden, something which I explained to the Mayor of London as a place which, as in the 18th century, Londoners can go and misbehave at night and have a really good time. And this is now, we're hoping, is going to bring in the next wave of energy behind the Green Enterprise District, the cable car, Siemens, to try and make this a popular destination. And a place which will be fun, exciting, and will generate ideas. So, in conclusion, I suppose the message really from London is we're moving away from end-state planning. We're more interested in process. And I suppose the one thing which we can do as urban practitioners is to try and create the conditions for the unexpected and sometimes the rather good to happen. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. That's a wonderful example of repurposing a city from another century, turning it into a 21st century city. It will take about 15 seconds till your slides come up, but they will come up. So just click it once and have faith.
So don't press yet, okay?
Right, exactly. So there we are.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure to speak to you today as President and CEO of Chicago Architecture Foundation, representing another livable city, Chicago. Like all cities, we face great challenges and great opportunities. You know, when we look at the past, the past vision of the livable city, you know, was the tall skyscraper and the wide boulevards. And this is what we did with it in Chicago. It didn't last very long. Our vision for the future is very different now. But as we look forward, we have to think about what is livability, for whom, and what does it look like? And livability might look like the corporate dream of Phillips, where they talk about the resilience, inclusivity, authenticity. Or it might look like the corporate dream of John Ronan, a local architect, who envisions that we will have pods where we store our cars, we'll have transportation, we'll have parks on top of the elevated line. It might look like that typical American suburban dream, where we're in a suburban house and we have a backyard where we can play. Or it might look like a planner's dream or a politician's dream, where status quo is just fine. And then, of course, it might look like the new urbanist dreams. So in other words, we have all these different dreams about what livability is. And so we have to really address, how do we make communities livable? What do we have to do going forward? You know, Chicago's like New York. We're really reclaiming our economy. And we're looking at going from a post-industrial nation to one that is really service-oriented. So how do we deal with that? What do our residents want, and what is really critical for the vitality of the community? So one of the things that Chicago did was really to make Millennium Park in 2004. This has really repositioned the city in terms of a world-class city. I think, like all of us, we're now competing in a global economy, both for our competitive workforce and certainly for the tourists and certainly for the businesses. Millennium Park's inclusion on the waterfront has reinvigorated the city, increased real estate values, and certainly increased the livability and the concept why design matters in the city. Who would have thought a few years ago that we would be a giant playpen on Michigan Avenue, or Fifth Avenue of our world, where kids played in the water fountain? Then we've also got this wonderful beachfront that we've really reclaimed. I had some friends stay with me from Canada a few years ago at our place in the Hancock. They went to the beach every single day. That's all they did. I never thought of Chicago as a beach destination. They did. But then you've really done a lot in your community here with the revitalization of the High Line. That has certainly changed real estate values and certainly the perception of people of the city of New York as a kinder, gentler place to live. We've reclaimed our riverfront, and we have a great river walk that we've invested in that makes it possible for people to bike, walk, jog along the river. And then, of course, we've got our river traffic with the famous Chicago Architecture Foundation river cruise there. But it really has made people think about kayaking in the river. I'm not sure we'll swim in it, but President Obama does have that in his dreams. And then you've certainly reclaimed the waterfront, too, with all the activities here. The visits to New York 10 years ago did not look like walking along the river. But, you know, as we go forward, the parks are the easy things for us to get citizen approval, to make our cities livable. But we've got some huge challenges in America. Our infrastructure is getting C's and D's. It's not going to be very sexy in 10 years when we're dealing with the transportation systems that are falling down, with the infrastructure repairs, getting people to allocate federal funding to local funding to do these projects. In Chicago, too, we're also dealing with public housing. We've torn down our high-rises. We're now integrating public housing into the fabric of our cities with low-rise housing. We don't know if it works yet. It's too new. But it's a challenge all of us face, affordable housing in our communities. We're also dealing with aging buildings. You know, 80% of the building stock in Chicago is old. And so how do we make it sustainable? How do we make it green? They're energy hogs. How do we make it so that people care about changing this infrastructure of our cities? So a lot of questions about what makes a community livable. And as we look going forward, what are these issues about livability? Well, they're vibrant public spaces. Those are the easy ones. It's about density. It's about walkability. It's about green infrastructure, buildings that reduce energy and our carbon footprint, access to transit, affordable housing, and of course jobs. But all of those take a very engaged public so that they make the decisions and they're backing in the dialogue about our engaged communities. And that's where the Chicago Architecture Foundation comes in. We really are the foot traffic, we're the people on the ground talking to the public. Our mission is to connect people through the power of design with their spaces and places to create and inspire livable communities. And we do that by creating a public dialogue with the public so that we actually engage people, we engage children, not just about knowing about their communities, but mapping their communities, discussing about why they care about what they walk down the street every day and pass on the way home, why the teacher should be engaged in thinking about the spaces that they call their neighborhood. We also engage high school students by our curriculums that we've developed that are Discover Design, that really allows students, the high school students, to engage in reformatting their school, designing their school, working in the 4 C's, the collaboration, the critical thinking, the creative placemaking, and really thinking about their neighborhood. So we're not only teaching them the skills to become good students, we're also teaching them the skills to really care about their cities as they go forward. The first Mayor Daley in Chicago did a lot of inspirational things, and it was because he took the Wacker Manual in grades 7, 8, and 9, where it really talked about civic building. We're hoping to do that with the next generation of students in Chicago. And so we also connect the young people with the places and spaces they call home. But our tours are probably our 10,000-pound gorilla. All of you have heard about the Chicago Architecture Foundation River Cruise, but what makes the tours really unique is that they're given by volunteers, and we have 460 volunteers who give our tours. We put them through 12-week training programs. They're our foot soldiers. They're the people on the ground. They translate very complex subject matter for the public, whether it be the tourists or the locals. They give 8,000 tours annually. That's 250,000 people. Just think of the impact of that. And also think about the impact in the community. I'm also always running into people on a Monday morning saying, I had one of your docents at a dinner party on the weekend. Boy, are they interesting. I say that I run a cult, and the cult is called the Chicago Architecture Foundation, and it's because of the strength of our volunteers. But then we also have a model of the city, and the model allows neighborhoods to come in and actually use it as a planning tool. The politicians actually come and place buildings on it. We do shadow testing, something that allows the neighborhoods to talk about the dialogue of the city. Exhibitions that challenge you with green with desire. So you want a nice house? Well, let's tell you about what the cost of that is on you. We have a great series called Chicago Debates. It's held in bars all around the city of Chicago. We debate everything from the casinos to the mauling of America. It's a popular series, needless to say, over beer. Public programs. We believe that we're a portal. We get people into our facility. We want to get them out on the street, really discovering and touching the city, because it's really that interconnectivity of the city. So many people want to talk about their built environment, but they don't have the dialogue about it. I kind of liken it to wine tasting. Remember how you sniff a wine and you say, oh, it's got green apples, or it's got legs. Well, think about the number of people who want to talk about their city and their built environment, but we don't give them the language to do it. And yet we expect them to go to a public meeting and comment, and they have not been educated about it. So we try to give them that language so that they can become community activists. So we believe design is a process, and people can participate. And that it's by exploring the city, you can really get to know the city. Where there be shrinking cities and the issues of many of the Midwest cities, what we're dealing with, hopefully not Chicago. Or where there be our Neighborhood Voices program, we actually have developed a docent training program in the neighborhoods. Doesn't look like the downtown tour program, very community engaged, but these people now have a sense of pride in place. One of the stories that was really powerful to me was one of the ladies who's actually holding the sign there when she's a real estate agent in Hyde Park, and she wanted to get Walgreens into their community because they had a food desert and Walgreens supplied food. And she brought this person from the airport and drove them around, and all she could see were the blighted streetscapes of 73rd Street. And she didn't know how to tell the stories about the community. When she finished this docent training program, she said, I could tell that guy, I could have driven him around now, and I can tell him about what it was and what it could be, and tell them the stories to re-envision the future. And so that's what we do at the Chicago Architecture Foundation. We really engage the public in a dialogue so that they can be inspired to create a livable community. Thank you.
I don't need it. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Rahul Bhardwaj. I'm President and CEO of the Toronto Community Foundation. Thanks for inviting a Canadian to come up here to talk about livability in cities. I won't have a slide presentation today, but what I did bring, and I'm going to refer to it a little bit later, is our Toronto's Vital Signs Report. And this report is a snapshot on the quality of life in the city, and it's put out every year by our Toronto Community Foundation. It was issued last week. When this first came out, it was 2,500 copies that came out and went to the usual suspects. Over 4 years, it's now 1 million in circulation, and this is how we get Toronto on the same page about a discussion about how to make it a livable city. I'm going to assume that you know a little bit about Toronto, but let me fill in a couple of gaps for you as well. If you haven't visited it, you may not know we're a city of about 2.7 million people in a region of about 5.5 million people. Now, what also makes us interesting to know is 50% of the population of the city of Toronto is foreign-born. That's the second highest on the planet, behind all places, Dubai. What's also interesting to know is that 25% of the population of the city of Toronto arrived in the last 20 years. So if you put that together, and I'm thinking about your slides a lot, we've got a very diverse city, amongst the most in the world, and we've managed a lot of change. And that managing change speaks a lot about the culture that we have in the city of Toronto. And what are some of the results from that? I think earlier today you'd been told about us being number 4 in the world on the Economist magazine in terms of livable cities on the planet, and we're very proud of that. What you might not know is that there are 3 out of the top 5 cities on that list all came from Canada. So we're pretty proud about the standard of livability we've got there. We're also number 2 in the world according to PricewaterhouseCoopers for innovation, intellectual capital, health, safety, and security. And that's a mouthful, and that's actually a pretty good mouthful. So that's on the good side of the ledger. The other side of the ledger, I want to just give you a snapshot of how change has happened in Toronto. In one respect, we've got this great livability and innovation and newcomers coming to town. On the other hand, between 1970 and 2005, we saw our middle-income neighborhoods go from 2/3 of all neighborhoods to under 30% of all neighborhoods by 2005. Over the same time period, remember this is extraordinary economic growth time, the high-income neighborhoods doubled. They went from 7 to 15%, and the low and very low-income neighborhoods went from 20 to 50% of the whole. Right now in Toronto, we call it City 1, 2, and 3. City 3 being the low and very low-income neighborhoods. They now make up 43% of Toronto. That's over 1 million people out of the 2.7 million living in low and very low-income neighborhoods, and 2/3 of them are visible minorities. You're starting to see some really uncomfortable concentration, particularly of poverty, and it's highly racialized. So the average of Toronto is fantastic, but of course the averages don't tell the whole story. What I want to spend another minute or two talking about is about philanthropy in Toronto and how philanthropy is in fact a city building catalyst. Now, to appreciate philanthropy a little bit is to also understand the DNA of Canada compared to the States. And I always chuckle, but I think there's some truth to it. In the US, your DNA is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In Canada, it's POG, which is peace, order, and good government. So your DNA gets you some really rocking parties, and we get some awesome bake sales. It's not quite fair, but we've actually got some good parties as well. But we're starting from 2 very different perspectives on how we city build. But in Toronto, what we've developed and really grown up with in philanthropy the last while is that philanthropy is not just your granddaddies cutting checks and brass plaques. Philanthropy has become the place or the space where the public sector and the private sector come together to develop innovative solutions to wicked problems. And you know, as I do, that the governments are retreating in their leadership role through a host of reasons, and they're not able to go forward as much as they had before. The private sector is pushing in a lot of ways, and philanthropy seems to be the place or the space where you can have those uncomfortable conversations but bring people together. And that's what we do a lot at the Toronto Community Foundation, and that's why we think we're a city building foundation. I want to give you 2 examples of how we've done that and the type of success it's had. And of course, there are tons of them, and there are a lot like you've already heard in the various cities, London and Chicago. But 2 of them, one in physical capital and one in social capital. Physical capital. Every once in a while, Toronto's vital signs will highlight to us a particular issue. So several years ago, this emanated from this, a notion that public space was in decline in Toronto. So we do what we do best. We convene around it. So we get people, like here, a lot smarter than us, into a room and come up with some ideas. And in Toronto, people say, well, what if you do something about parks? Somebody else said, what about ravines? And if you didn't know, Toronto's clean piece of urbanness is our ravines. I mean, it's a defining characteristic of Toronto. But then somebody else said, how about subways? We said, what do you mean by subways? Well, at that time in Toronto, we had a wonderful cultural renaissance going on above ground Royal Ontario Museum, Four Seasons Centre for Opera, a new art gallery being built, all connected by subways, but they all look like washrooms. So you've got this fantastic cultural renaissance above ground, but everything underground looks like washrooms. So we said, well, listen, let's put this together and reimagine what public space could look like. So we created something called Arts on Track, and we revitalized something called the Museum Subway Station. And if you go online, you'll see it. It looks like the gateway experience to a museum. But the important part about that is we created a public philanthropic partnership, what we call our P3s. So we went to donors, and because we could get their money, we could bring in the public sector, we could go to the private sector. And it may sound pretty straightforward to you, but this was relatively new to Toronto, and it really has taken off, and it's created a bit of a model. The other one that I want to speak about briefly is around the social capital side. And this is something that we're seeing really being stressed in Toronto, at stress. Peter, you talked a little bit about what was going on in London. In Toronto, 2/3 of individuals have a strong or somewhat strong sense of belonging with the city. That's pretty good, 2/3. But that means 1/3 doesn't. And if you had 1/3 homelessness or 1/3 unemployment, you've got a national crisis. So when we're looking at this and seeing that lack of sense of belonging, we're seeing that concentrated, particularly amongst newcomer youth in that City 3 that I spoke about a little earlier. A couple of years ago, we had a flare-up in that area. It was called Summer of the Gun. And putting it bluntly, it was young, black, youth-on-youth violence in some of these high-priority neighborhoods. They were shooting each other. So the Community Foundation got involved. We went out to the community at large and said, why don't we get together, convene, you tell us what we should be doing about this. Large consultation. To cut to the chase, they said, these young men in particular need better leadership pathways. So we said, okay, what if? What if we created healthy activity for them and provided them an opportunity to get national level certification in sports leadership? Very simple. Lifeguards, soccer coaches, basketball coaches. And they said, well, this is fantastic. They don't have these pathways. So very simply, we created a program called the Toronto Sports Leadership Program. We got a donor to put in some money. We went down the street to our other partners at the YMCA, et cetera. They said, we love this idea. We'll support you. City of Toronto said, boy, we need lifeguards. We need soccer coaches. We'll hire some of these kids. In the first 4 years, we had 400 kids certified at least one nationally recognized level of sports activity. And we had over 200 gain full-time employment out of this. The important part about this story is we created new pathways out of City 3 and helped create social capital and connect them with the broader city. So those are two sort of juxtaposed ideas about how we take a research document like Vital Signs, how we convene around it, how we engage philanthropy to build a more livable city. And the last point that I'd make on this is when we in Toronto talk about trying to create a livable city, we don't start from a vision that's predicated on cost cutting. We start from a position that's predicated on you better love your city first.
Thank you. Brent.
Yes. Well, it's an honor. We'll try it here. It's an honor to be here with you today, and thank you for including me on this panel and having Dallas be a part of the conversation. First, you may be asking yourself, why Dallas? It's interesting in your slides, when you think about these medium cities, Dallas is growing, and it's going to continue to grow. I want to share a little bit with you about our city and what we're doing to think about livability. And as I go through this, it's really about approach, sort of building on what Peter's been saying, and actually also this notion about public and private partnerships, which is very strong in Dallas. We have a very, very robust philanthropic community. And so with this, it is rooted in design and it is rooted in collaboration. So, there we go. Dallas sits on a prairie. It's a very different city. It's a car-oriented city. It's very fractured in a lot of ways, as you saw on the last slide. About 1.6 million people, 1.3 million people, and this growth has all occurred really within the last 40, 50 years, where we came into sort of this sort of status as that strong medium city, as you were talking about. But in our metro area, there are over 6 million people. Now, Aaron, you recently wrote about, the Texas story is real, and I'll tell you it is. If you look at the left side of that slide, everything has been built in the last 10 years. We are growing. People are coming to Dallas, and we could say not necessarily for walkability. It's for the economic vibrancy
not
that's
for
in
walkability.
Dallas, right? They're not. And so it comes back to the question of what is livable for people. And I think the opportunity and access to a rich and robust economy is a big piece of that, being able to get a job. But what we've done is invested. This morning it talked about sort of culture centers and anchors, culture anchors for this city. I think it was Tony that mentioned that. And we've done that. Over $300 million of private money that went to public buildings. We are collecting, a lot of people think, architects and great buildings. And this is a wonderful place and a vibrant place for our city as we build it forward. It's one big sort of element as we do that. But our city has a river, about 20 miles that runs through it. It's really a floodway. And there is a great project, a really grand project that is planned there. The scale is amazing. It's the largest urban forest in North America. It's over, which exceeds over 6,500 acres. And overall, this middle through here is over 14,000 acres. And it's trying to convert that into what was just seen as a place for water to sort of convey its way through our city to being transferred to being a place for people. Well, this happens in other places around the world, but in Dallas, we do like to think that we do things big. And so, not unlike that, though, as we moved our river, we literally had moved our river and we had built levees, it created a division in our city that socially, quite frankly, we have not been able to overcome no matter what we can do. And so we built great bridges, and this is the Margaret Hunt Hill Bridge, which will open in the spring by Santiago Calatrava. Again, great amounts of private money that have helped to do that. A pedestrian bridge, the old bridge, that will be a place for people and cycles that will cross this great park. As we work to connect our city, the image of these great projects are seen very differently. And so at one end, a modest neighborhood. And as that bridge is built and as it changes the way we act in our city, it threatens. And it creates challenges for individuals that see investment coming and development opportunities coming, but not necessarily, or where is their place, where is their voice within the future of that community. So it goes to the social equity within our city. I'm an outsider from city government. I created the BC Workshop as a community design resource. You have these plenty on the east and west coasts across the country. And actually working in communities and engaging design as a means by which to be a tool of empowerment. Well, one day I got a phone call and 3 women were meeting. Mary Soom, our city manager, Gail Thomas, that's the head of the Trinity Trust Foundation, and a great visionary and philanthropist, Edie Rose. And they had an idea that design could be the tool by which we thought about our city outside of those levees. And very intentionally as we thought about how it might craft. Well, it's hard to say no to any of them individually. When they all 3 ask, you wake up and you're on a stage in New York and you're talking about your work as a part of the city. And we created an office, not unlike what Peter had done in London, a design studio that would have a clear agenda, a very clear and deliberate agenda to convene a discussion about the design and the shape of our city forward. And it would be in City Hall. It would be anchored as a director, as a consultant, myself from the outside, Larry Beasley from Vancouver that tops, and continues to top the cities around livability. And so as we work, it is about convening. It's about residents. It's about business leaders, investors, and developers coming together. And to some degree, it is about negotiation, but it's also about respect and understanding each other's position and what we want. Design is at its core. We design daily. We're constantly drawing, envisioning, and we're trying to help to articulate what the future may be and realize where it may come in the smallest of increments, in those small increments outside of the big projects. And as we put forward policies and as we work in the West Dallas Urban Structure and Guidelines, which is a 500-acre plan that actually put first and foremost the enhancement and the protection of a sitting modest neighborhood. That new development and the sitting communities that exist along our rivers can exist together, and that we can think about it very proactively, and that the city is the rightful place to be that convener as a tool. So using the code, how do we create the incremental nature? And Peter did a good job of talking about this, in that these things don't spring up overnight. It takes time. And the plans and the work that we have done in a lot of ways, are trying to get away from master plans and much more around structures that will allow for incremental growth. But along with the code comes the economic development and the investment. So often, many times, there are plans, but the investment does not happen in a proportional sort of measure to follow, to enact it in a way where all benefit. And so mapping that out intentionally while you think about the quality of spaces to the realization of capital input. I mean, this is in essence of $3 to $4 billion of new development. And so extracting the public good from the development process in a proactive way to benefit those that are there today as well as those that will come. We are doing all the city shaping work at a very basic level. I think we're building parks, we're recapturing the public realm, we're engaging various forms of transit, streetcars, bicycles, and the like. Texas Monthly, which is a regional sort of popular culture magazine, I think captured what we're doing the best. In the modest communities of our city, there are people, and what our work is really about is the human condition. And so no matter, and I really appreciated the questions around what does livability mean? And to each and every one of us to have the voice amplified within the process of how we shape our cities forward is just as important as the ideas that come from multiples of directions. So I think that's what we're doing in Dallas. And so with that, I'm so thankful to be here, and I look forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you.
No, come up. Thanks. Thank you. You know, I got to confess, it's a little odd to be part of a panel of people from out of town coming to talk to New York about livability, because I would almost think it would be the other way around today. I think perhaps more than any other city in the last few years, New York has really upped the ante on its livability agenda and has sort of become what Portland was back in the 1990s, and that is, in America, the city people look to and they want to say, today, if we want to be doing something to make our city more livable, what should we be doing? And I think New York is that city today. And I get a little skeptical of some of those quality of life surveys because I think a lot of times they compare apples and oranges. I really think New York is really going in the right direction on livability. But be that as it may, I'd like to talk about a few projects, a couple bricks and mortars, and a couple in the digital media and technology space. I do live in Chicago today, but I'm originally from Indiana, so I want to highlight a few projects out of Indianapolis, actually. And the first one is called the Indy Cultural Trail. Now, Indianapolis is like DC. It was laid out as a master plan city. So it was laid out with these really wide streets that were intended to befit a capital city. And frankly, they're too wide. They're very auto-oriented today. Plus, our downtown is fairly low density, and the activity centers of downtown Indianapolis are kind of spread out over a fairly wide 5.5 square mile area. They aren't linked very well because of these streets. And so what they decided to do in order to correct that was to take 8 miles of lanes away from cars and give them to people in the form of a, what's this thing on?
If you press it in 15 seconds.
Okay, in the form of kind of a loop and spur trail system called the Cultural Trail that links their downtown cultural districts and attractions together with a high quality connection for everyone, not just for cars. There's a map. Here you see the finished product. It'll be totally complete next summer. You see here they've got a very high quality bicycle track. There's a separate pedestrian trail along quite a bit of it, a lot of landscaping, high density street lighting, unique signage. There's public art that's been installed throughout. You also see here rain gardens with native plantings for integrated green stormwater detention. So really, this is a night and day difference versus what the streets were before. This is a project I highly encourage you to check out because I think it's one of the most unique and innovative out there in the country right now from a small city. It's indyculturaltrail.org if you want to check it out. And zero state and local tax dollars went to this, by the way. Another project out of Indianapolis is on Georgia Street, which is a few block street that links their convention center with their arena through the main kind of events and entertainment district downtown. As you can see here, it's 6 lanes basically wide and not even really that well patronized by cars. Frankly, it's kind of a bleak street, and a lot of the buildings on it don't really take advantage of their street frontage because of that. So I said, well, what can we do to re-energize and reinvent that street? They said, why don't we take 2/3 of that space that's currently allocated to cars, and let's reallocate it to people in the form of a landscape pedestrian promenade in the median of the street, sort of modeled after Las Ramblas in Barcelona. And so you can see the work in progress right here. Actually, construction completes this month. I'll be very eager to see it next summer when all the greenery comes in. You'll note that they didn't fully pedestrianize it, which was smart because in the US that's generally failed when they've tried to do it. There's still going to be 2 lanes, one each direction left for cars, but again it's going to be a radically transformed space, and hopefully will pay dividends for many years to come. Again, this was a federally funded project, so no state or local tax dollars went towards it. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk also about how digital media and technology can help make our cities more livable. And one way they can do that is just by enhancing our experience of public space. And I want to highlight another project out of Indianapolis. This is one that I spearheaded. It was actually inspired by Lynn Osmond and the Chicago Architecture Foundation. You know, they have all those wonderful guided tours of Chicago architectural sites. But Indianapolis has a much lower volume of visitors and lower density of attractions, so frankly that model's not really sustainable there. So what we decided to do instead was go with the self-guided tour model. So it was a collaboration with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, the AIA Indiana chapter, a local architectural firm. We created this tours. You can consume them via a website, which you can see here, audio or text, or you can just download them to your phone, walk around, take it with you, stand in front of the building with your map, listen to a local architect tell you about the building you're standing in front of or the space you're standing in. Walkindianapolis.com is the site. There's a couple tours up now, and we plan to do more. There's also a great site out of Los Angeles, Downtown LA Walks, that does something similar. This one actually cost $0 to produce. It was all volunteer, and we didn't need any government permission or permits to make it happen, which was great. And then and this is just scratched the surface, by the way, what you can do with mobile device. You see that there's all sorts of, like, everything from transit tracker apps to augmented reality navigational systems that are not only enhancing our experience of public space, they're also just plain making our cities more functional. It's really impressive what you can do with these things these days. And then lastly, I want to talk a little bit about how you can use digital media, social media for advocacy purposes. Streets Blog out of New York, of course, is a major site, but from coast to coast, there are bloggers and activists using these social media tools to educate the public, to build the demand for more livable cities policies, and to be very strident advocates for livability in their cities. Here's one out of St. Louis, nextstl.com. And a lot of these sites are run by millennials, and they could be, I admit, a little prickly and puristic in their points of view, but I think that's great because they're independent, so they're able to take these very aggressive stances that, quite frankly, people who are institutionally affiliated just can't do. So I think it makes for a great good cop, bad cop routine, or maybe an inside-outside game. And these sites are now networked, not just nationally, but globally, so they've become a powerful distribution engine for ideas, best practices, and even outrage. Here's one hot off the presses. GM launched a print campaign that basically said, stop pedaling, start driving, aiming at college students who, in the ad, there's a poor kid who can't get a girl to pay attention to him because he's on his bike. They're like, buy our GM car. And there was so much outrage out there on the internet, GM yanked the campaign already. So that'll show you the power of these new technologies and really influencing public opinion. So for those of you who are part of institutions, I'd encourage you to take these people seriously and help partner with them. So that's just a couple of things. Again, I wanted to highlight the digital media example simply because so often we think of livability in terms of bricks and mortar, but there's a whole lot more to it than just physical stuff. So I think there's tremendous ways we can use this to enhance livability. So thanks. I look forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you very much. I think we've heard some really wonderful ideas here. We've certainly heard the physical dimension and the qualities that will make a livable place. I think there's total agreement among this panel that walkable green places are what we're after. I think we've heard some hints about the issues of social division within our cities. We had a little bit of discussion, and I'd like to take this up more, about decision-making in the cities and how the ideas that all of you are representing, basically from the non-public sector, attempt to affect decision-making in your city. Would anybody like to try to handle that question?
I'm happy to start. I have to say that I was part of the public sector when I worked for Design for London. I'm now part of the private sector. I don't think it makes a huge amount of difference because it's about influencing. And I said in my slide that something which we did at Design for London was to move away from plans towards narratives. And we've found that narratives are very, very powerful things to engage, not just with local communities, but with politicians, and trying to couch the work that we wanted to do in a form which a politician could grab in very, very short periods of time. If you're trying to influence a politician, it is, I'm afraid, about sound bites. You haven't got very much time. You have to pitch what you think you want to do for the city in a way that hits the political agenda. And I gave the example of the Green Enterprise District. The Green Enterprise District in London, which I said it's not a plan, it's a concept, came out of a discussion I had with the Mayor of London, where he was concerned about the financial crash and the impact on London's economy. He was concerned in another part of the conversation about the pressure he was under, about not being seen to be doing enough about the environment. And he was also concerned about the Olympic legacy. And I think that the Green Enterprise District was spinning those three ideas together into a very, very simple brand concept, which allowed the mayor to understand how you put those together. So I suppose it's about actually how you can pitch complex ideas into very, very simple narratives. I think it works at all levels in both community planning and city government.
I would agree, actually. I think we teach our docents storytelling, but we also do that in the community because that's the way they remember, that's the way the politicians remember. I think, though, one of the challenges we have right now in Chicago is we're going from almost a dictatorship with Mayor Daley to a new mayor with Mayor Rahm Emanuel, so we're learning our public voice, which is looking like it's going to be quite different than the past. In terms of our community engagement, one of the things, though, I feel strongly about is too often we call on the public when there's a decision to be made, but we don't engage them through the process of community building. And so I think that that's really important to make sure that there's continuous touch principles with the public on issues that might not necessarily rise to the surface of the tall building that's going up in their neighborhood that they don't want to have, but to continue to engage them so that they're part of that public discussion and they have that vocabulary to really communicate.
And in Toronto?
Boy, that's a tough question to really get at. I say that Toronto, we have a 21st century city living in an 1867 governance system. And I'm sure that you've got that issue in other cities around the world and probably in the US too. So we've got some real infrastructure issues when it comes to the political infrastructure and how decisions are made. One of the other challenges is we recently had a mayor elected who came in on a cost-cutting vision. And it's a very challenging discussion to have when they believe there's a strong cost-cutting mandate, yet we became, quote, that fourth most livable city in the world by building. And we're a city of builders, a community of builders, and now we have that issue about how do we continue to build where there's this mind frame that the right thing to do is all about cost cutting. So going back to Peter's point, what we've turned to is the narrative, and this is very, very much the narrative on vital signs. So we try to get everybody on one page long enough to start having a discussion about it. The other advantage that we have, as a foundation, is we're fundamentally endowment-based, so we're into the long-term game. So we're one of the few parties that can stand up and say, look, let's not start rewarding too much short-term thinking, and let's really try to push the agenda of a long-term overall vision for the city or whatever the direction we're going to go in.
Which a locally elected politician for a short term may not listen to.
So to the other's point, you want to build a narrative, you want to engage people in that discussion, and when you're in for the long term, you're in for the long term.
A lot of good answers, and I think to piggyback, in my case, my city, we are city manager form of government, so we don't have the strong mayor, but we have 14 council districts and then a mayor. So we've situated the studio and at the leadership of the city manager as an extension of her office, as she manages the staff, and so we actually work with all the departments in the city in a very collaborative way to sort of build a cross-platform approach. It can't just be all about what we're doing. And in addition to that, I think the idea of narratives and storytelling is a backbone of everything that we're doing. And especially, when when there are dollars that are able to be targeted or focused in a community, as we engage and as we involve residents within that space, and that they help to direct how that goes, and as you involve the decision makers, the council, the elected politicians within that process, they get excited to see not only how they can help to encourage something that their residents and voters want, and then ideally help to make it happen quickly. Get the barriers of regulation out of the way. When it's a good idea, people want it, it's going to improve lives. Let's don't get hung up in the red tape. And so we kind of cut through that as much as we can.
Well, I'm a blogger, not really in the project implementation business too much. I can tell you, though, in Indianapolis, like Chicago, there's been a very, very high ability to execute, but less driven by a strong mayor than by an extremely cohesive civic sector. Really, the business and community leaders there have a very high degree of unity, and once they kind of come to consensus on something, there's very little backbiting, and there's very little that can be done to kind of derail a plan. So I think that's why they're able to execute things like that cultural trail. For myself, I also think, though, a lot of times you don't have to have everything go through. It's not all a bricks and mortar thing that has to go through the planning department. There's all sorts of things I think we could all do that don't require any permission and any money, that we could all start making our neighborhoods and communities a little bit better based on what we could do by our own initiative. One reason that I did that architectural tour thing was one of my ideas was I said, look, if I can't get a single person to help me, I can buy some web hosting myself and just do the whole thing myself. And we got some people to help, but I think there's a lot of ways that you can sort of bypass by simply picking projects that don't really require a lot of public sector involvement if you can avoid it.
Now, with the exception of London, which is busily engaged in large infrastructure projects because of the Olympics, I'm wondering in each of your cities, what are the large projects that need to be done, and how do you provide the vision around these and focus community attention on large projects as well as individual neighborhood projects?
Our big one is going to be transportation. We have an aging transportation system. There's not money in the pipeline to do it. The last stimulus package got sucked up by the state and went into highway construction in southern Illinois. So we're looking at what our transportation in future is. We actually have a wonderful opportunity. The Rockefeller Foundation is working with us right now to look at bus rapid transit. And I'm involved in that in terms of looking at, we have the policy wonks can talk about transportation, but how do you make it a case for neighborhoods to take back lanes of traffic to actually put a bus on it? So it's that public dialogue again. But you know, we're not seeing infrastructure spending right now in Chicago, and we need to see it.
Not too far off the mark. The OECD noted that the congestion and gridlock in the Toronto region is the single biggest threat to the region's prosperity. The other thing they noted too, that Canada is the only one of the 31 OECD nations that does not have a long-term federal plan involved in transit. So the federal government is AWOL as it relates to long-term transit planning in the city of Toronto. The province has a relationship and they're getting more involved in it. So transit's the big piece. Not only how do we get people and goods and services around our city, but how do we connect those various elements of City 1, 2, and 3 that I spoke about earlier? So create the social capital by connecting those communities with the larger city. Now, interestingly enough, we have Pan Am Games coming to Toronto in 2015. So much, we've been studying what London's up to very much to see about how do you build a strong legacy of not only infrastructure, but social capital after games like that. And we have a $50 billion commitment over the next 25 years by the provincial government to help regional transit. And we're using the Pan Am Games as a catalyst for that. And I'm thrilled to be sitting on the board of the agency that's overseeing that.
That's a huge opportunity.
It is
See
absolutely.
what happens. We'll all be watching. How about you, Brent?
You know, our Trinity project is, you know, I think I said this, you know, it seeds $2 billion, and it will reshape our city. It will absolutely change Dallas. One of the things that is difficult is, I mean, the big projects for us is a young city. We like them, and we want to do them. Securing the dollars for the neighborhoods, you know, these sort of smaller little projects is tough. And I think one of the things that we're working hard on, and we talk a lot about, is securing performance within the development sector to help to secure public goods. And, you know, we have to find ways to use our codes and to use our land development rights and our economic development in a way to do that.
You just said you're going to get rid of your codes a minute ago.
Well,
There's a
we
slide up
try.
there.
We try. There's been proposed
wait a
that we have an
minute.
annual burning. But at the same time, I mean, Texas is a huge, personal property rights state. And as zoning is really seen as a limiter, not as an enabler. And we're making those shifts. And it's on an individual negotiation basis so that we can help to secure the public realm. And where we are is a great example of that. And, we're getting there. And I think that is where we are accelerating because, we're seen as a fairly conservative place. And to be talking about securing the public goods through the development sector is quite progressive, I think.
What's the development sector saying?
Well, so far pretty good. We just actually had a case passed just the other day, and there were some of the most stringent requirements we've seen on a development where, actually the image that is being portrayed is the one that will be constructed and not something, let's say, different. So good.
Yeah, and I'll talk about Chicago here because I experience it daily. We definitely have transport infrastructure issues. There's a couple of areas that need addressing. One's in reasonably good shape, and that's renewing the airports. Midway Airport has a brand new terminal, and there's also a massive project underway at O'Hare, the O'Hare Modernization Program. Obviously, that's something that should be near and dear to New York's heart. And I can tell you, airport upgrades are desperately needed here in the worst possible way.
Say such a thing.
But I think that's progressing along. Many lawsuits over cemeteries and such, but I think will ultimately get done. Public transport is where we're really struggling. Partially it's just because I think there's a fatalistic attitude towards it. The city's becoming more disconnected, I think, from its public transit as more and more people. I tell you, I don't own a car, but in my building in the middle of the day, the garage is empty. Everybody's driving to work, even though it's in the city, close to transit.
Where are their jobs, though?
Yeah,
Are
well,
they in the suburbs?
some of them work in the suburbs, some of them do work in the city.
That's where all the new job creation
And so
is, in the suburbs.
yeah, a lot of it is we have a powerful core too, but a lot of people, I'm surprised how many people drive downtown to work.
What's the parking rate?
It's a good question, $20 a day, but I don't have a
more.
monthly, I don't have a,
Should be more.
well, we're just putting it, we're taking care of that. We're taking care of that. But I will say, I don't sense that there's really a commitment in the city to improving its public transport network. I'm a fan of Rahm Emanuel, but you look at his streets commissioner, he brought in Gabe Klein from Washington, D.C. for head of the transit agency. It was a political ally of his who needed a home, who has no transit background. And there's such a huge capital deficit and very little mechanism to raise money. I just think it's just such a huge problem. I don't really know that people are going to tackle it. I'm a little skeptical that they will. But I think the first thing we can do from a capital perspective is also relevant to New York. In the United States, our transit construction costs, particularly for rail, are way out of control. I was just looking at a Danish study. We're spending over twice per route kilometer what's being spent in Europe for rail projects. We have a plethora of problems from our NEPA process related to transit to Buy American, but we have to stop penalizing construction costs in order to make it more feasible for us to
Well, maybe
to
you
build.
don't need heavy rail. Maybe the bus rapid transit that you're looking
I think it's a
at
great
might
example.
be a better solution to the cost issue as well as the flexibility issue in terms of mobility. But let's go to London and tell us about, since we've heard an awful lot about transportation infrastructure here, you're obviously making lots of investments here. What do you think are the best and the worst investments you're making?
Well, in transport, well,
Well,
we've got exactly the same kind of issues, and I would have said the same, is transport. We are building Crossrail. That will be an underground line which will link Heathrow in the west with the city and the business districts in the east and link in with the national rail networks. It's taken us 25 years to plan this one, and we've now got 2 tunnel boring machines under London building the tunnel. Shanghai has 46 tunnel boring machines at the last count under Shanghai. And when you look at those kind of figures, and if you look at the impact that especially the Asian cities are going to make in a very competitive global economy, I think the problems we're facing here in North America and in Europe and in London are extreme in terms of our failure to invest. And the point made about the punitive costs we seem to impose on ourselves in building this kind of infrastructure. I suppose the sort of second issue is actually around housing and our real difficulties in London in building the kind of the civilized, high quality housing we need to house a population. in good conditions to match the aspirations any city should have in terms of quality of life. So those are the two really big problems, that if anybody has an answer to those, please tell me afterwards, because you'll make a fortune in London. I expect in most other cities.
I wonder if we have any questions from the audience. If not, we'll keep asking each other. I can't see. Is there anybody with a question? Yes. I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, the globalization of retail.
I mean, I would say one thing is, like, New York is so fortunate that there's high demand for the central city. In places like Indianapolis, I suspect there's some of this in Dallas too. It's a 100% automobile-oriented city. Their central core is down well over 50% in population off peak. There's very little investment. So many cities are just desperate for anything, and they're basically not. So these people who want to come in with gas stations or very low-quality buildings know that. And so they're able to do it. New York has the luxury of having high demand, so I think New York is in a position to be a little more demanding in terms of its development than other cities might be, although obviously it varies by neighborhood.
It's called density. You were going to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same in Dallas. I mean, we've done some good things in the downtown core to begin to limit that through urban design guidelines and the like, and so we're moving away from that a little bit better, but we still have a lot of parking lots as a result of tearing down a lot of the older buildings during the 80s. Which unfortunately that would have been really wonderful building stock to have improved our walkability as it stands today. So,
in Illinois, Landmarks Illinois actually did a preservation story about the four corners, street corners, because so many street corners are now being made into banks or to drugstores. So that, I think, is a nationwide problem. But when you think about the heritage of it, they used to be the grocery store. I mean, so, the drugstore has kind of replaced the grocery store. The good news that we've heard is that the banks are now withdrawing. In the last 2 weeks, we've been hearing about Chase and other banks are now withdrawing from the street corners. They have too much of a presence. But those are probably going to be replaced with Starbucks. So, I mean, I think there's always been commercial entities on the corner. They just don't look as attractive as the mom and pop local store.
Toronto issue?
Well, oh, boy, is it ever. But Toronto, we're a city of neighborhoods. And there's still a sense of community that people really do push back, especially when the big boxes want to come in, and they're starting to come into the downtown core more. But we've got a very vital core, so communities are getting up to push them out. We have an interesting role reversal going on in Toronto now, given the transit situation, the gridlock. The folks that were buying in the outer ridge and the suburbs are now, it's too long and too expensive to live out there in terms of how much time and gas, et cetera. So they're trying to come back into downtown, which has already been gentrified, so that's priced out. And the mom and pops are pretty well all gone because they've sold out to move out to the suburbs. So we've got this very strange conundrum going on. But the constant through all of it, though, is there's still a lot of neighborhood identity. So the type of issue that you're talking about is one that you'll see sprout up in Toronto all the time, that communities are coming together to try to define the livability of their particular neighborhood.
London?
I think it's a really difficult issue because at the moment there's a real pushback on regulation and the idea that to compete we're going to have a less regulated city and a city where you have far less control. I think the paradox is that on the one hand, especially in Britain at the moment, the government's talking about less regulation but more participation, faster planning but more consultative planning. The two things don't actually work that well together. And I suppose the thing I would suggest is that when we talk about the importance of environmental sustainability, I suspect that the truly sustainable city is going to be a slightly more regulated city than the models we have at the moment.
Any other questions? Do you have questions of each other? That you've been listening? I'm just wondering. I mean, oftentimes you don't get a chance to ask anything.
Well, Dave, I've got a real just curiosity. We can take it offline, though. I'd like to know more about the social capital legacy and how serious London is about having one post-Olympic Games. What sort of resources have been put into it?
We'll do a quick answer to that. The mayor of one of the boroughs where the Olympic Games is happening has a vision for his area, and his vision is that he wants his area to be average in 20 years' time. He sees it as being a 20-year job to match his borough with average educational attainment, average unemployment, average health indices, and average housing quality, which does, shows the sheer problems we have. London bid for the Games for the regeneration of this poorest area. It cited the Games there, and that's how you'll have to judge us, whether or not we achieve that. And hopefully some of the strategies we're putting in place are about trying to use the Games to do it. But actually, I have to say, if you want to regenerate an area, building an Olympic Games is a fairly strange place to start.
You just have to compete. Sort of a bad story here in New York and Chicago. So.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's an even worse story in Paris, by the way.
Yes, even worse for Paris. That's true. So, looking 50 years hence, what do you see in the cities in which you live? What do you see has happened, and what will your city be like?
I can jump into this a little bit. I'm really optimistic, to be honest with you. I think in a lot of ways, Toronto is a bit of a petri dish for globalization. I think social inclusion and diversity are really core elements of the culture of the city of Toronto. And I really think that we have the ability to have a very positive future. And if you look at what we talk about in vital signs, we're on the right trends in a lot of directions. We've got some issues, but I think we're getting an even more engaged population. So I'm still quite optimistic.
I don't think Chicago is going to be the second city in the flyover city. I think New York, watch out.
Dallas?
We are going to define ourselves differently, I think, than the mega cities. Because of our suburban nature, the way we'll engage density, if we can double our density, right, which will put us, I think, still at half of what London's density is, it will be a great day. And I think we'll be on the way to do that without destroying the neighborhoods in the process.
Well, maybe fuel prices will go up.
Unfortunately, we're quite close to the source, I'm afraid.
London and then Indianapolis.
Yeah, go. Yeah. Oh, I think Indianapolis is just going to be I think it's going to be like a halfway version of a little bit of a Sun Belt city in terms of it's already the fastest growing region in the Midwest by a long shot, growing twice as fast as the nation. So I think it's going to be a preferred destination in the Midwest for people who want a Dallas-style lifestyle in a little bit smaller city, but probably not the hot, super high-end economy that you're going to find in a New York or a Chicago, but more for the average middle-class family, a very affordable, easy quality of life place to live.
Yeah, very important.
I'm going to be European and pessimistic, I think, at this stage.
I shouldn't have asked you that.
And I have to say, as an English person, I'm deeply pessimistic. As a Londoner, I'm relatively optimistic. I think cities like London, like New York, and I suspect Chicago, I don't know Chicago and the other cities particularly well, are actually pretty robust organizations that will cope very, very well with extreme political and economic change in this century. The next 50 years, next 30 years are going to see an extraordinary shift eastwards in the global economy. And cities like, our cities here will survive by the ability to be fleet of foot, to innovate and to add value. Now, I think our cities can do it, and it comes back to our ability to create the conditions for that flexibility and that innovation to thrive, because actually that's about all we have got. And it is going to be a very, very tough 50 years ahead of us.
That's a beautiful answer. It brings us full circle from where we started today. Your enthusiasm, your love for your cities, your vision for your cities is truly inspiring for us. I want to thank you very much for coming and sharing your experiences with us here in New York.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.